Good afternoon. We're a very low-tech presentation. We have nothing to show you up there, no pictures. I'll let Barbara speak first. She's going to give you a lot of the history because she worked very diligently on this in order to get the district established, and then I'll fill you in on what's happened in the last 2.5 years.
Good afternoon. I'm guessing that there are only a handful of people in the audience who have any idea about the success story of the Dunhams Bay wastewater. Okay. Is that better? I'm assuming that there are only a handful of people in the audience who have any idea about the success story of the North Queensbury Wastewater Disposal District Number 1 and the public and private sector individuals who've contributed to that small but very significant accomplishment. And Alan and I are here to change all that. First, a little background information. The Dunhams Bay Association was formed 40 years ago by property owners around the bay in order to work together to protect the quality of the water and the life within their Lake George Bay. Annually, a different speaker is invited to the association's July business meeting to make a presentation of interest to Bay owners. In July of 2011, Kathy Bizzoni, who was working for the fund at that time, was invited to speak to the association regarding lake-wide algal bloom issues. After her slideshow presentation, many in attendance requested that Kathy swim off their property and to assess the algae situation more specific to their homes. In July of 2012, Kathy returned with underwater photographs of algal blooms taken specifically in our bay. Residents were surprised to see the extent of the algae growth around their waterfronts, contrasted with the areas of healthy plant vegetation in the bay. Out of concern for the state of the bay, the Dunhams Bay Water Quality Awareness Committee was formed, and Kathy was asked to continue her underwater photography and algae testing around the entire bay. First, we alerted numerous Dunhams Bay homeowners by letter, which included photographs of the existence of algal blooms in and around the vicinity of their property. Acknowledging the difficulty of pinpointing exactly where any pollution was coming from, letters were usually sent to a grouping of homeowners. Algae testing done by the fund on samples Kathy had collected indicated the presence of organic pollution, which was the indication of septic system failure. Our second project was to complete a review of septic system records for Bay properties using current Town of Queensbury records, and where no current town records existed, Lake George Park Commission files from a 1973 septic system survey. Former Queensbury Supervisor Ron Montesi provided encouragement and asked Town of Queensbury personnel to help us with our fact-finding. What we found was that 79% of our Dunhams Bay properties were either only marginally documented or totally undocumented. With those two facts in mind, during the summer of 2013, we began to address septic issues with a series of public information meetings. Dave Decker organized and chaired these meetings, and we relied heavily on Kathy and Chris Nowitzki for their knowledge and expertise. Homeowners' concerns and questions were addressed at these forums. After our first public meeting, Supervisor Strauss suggested that we circulate a petition asking for the town to investigate possible solutions. The residents in attendance heartily agreed, and we began soliciting signatures. 67% of Bay homeowners signed a petition indicating their interest in exploring the creation of a wastewater district. These discussions and meetings culminated in a hearing held on December 1st, 2014, and at that hearing, the North Queensbury Wastewater Disposal District became official with the town's approval of the final order. We became a New York State recognized responsible management entity. A significant benefit of having this designation is that we now qualified for state, federal, and not-for-profit funding. In a much appreciated show of support and encouragement, the Fund for Lake George announced that $50,000 had been allocated for a matching grant program to support septic system upgrades. To support the new district and to partially fund homeowners' pump-out expenses, a $69.19 tax levy per parcel also was instituted. In February of 2015, the advisory board met for the first time. It consisted of 11 volunteers charged with advising the town board on issues relating to the newly created wastewater district. Throughout the entire process, we've enjoyed the support of Supervisor Strow, Councilman Medevere, Town Attorney Robert Hafner, and the entire town board. We have had invaluable expertise from Chris Nowitzki and Kathy Bizzoni. Alan will take you through the events of the first years of our district, but I hope you will have seen that the significance of a grassroots effort by a small group of homeowners motivated by water quality issues affecting a bay and lake that they love. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. My comments this afternoon will center basically on the progress that we've made in the last couple of years in our district. Our district essentially is the shoreline that surrounds Dunhams Bay, which is on the east side of Lake George, about 6 miles up from the village, for any of you who aren't knowledgeable about where it is. First, a little bit of history, though, my history of life on Dunhams Bay and my septic experiences. My great-grandfather first bought a camp on Lake George over 100 years ago. He also had a lot attached with that on which he built another cottage. Somewhere in the time period after my father and his 3 brothers and my grandmother started spending summers there, and an outhouse was put in. And I like to think of it as a condo outhouse. It was built right on the property line between both properties. Our neighbors ultimately, when I came along, the Catlins and myself, and our family would use one or the other side of it. There was a wall down the center. It was a pretty nice place. It had a slate roof and everything else. I grew up, my first summer there, I was probably 3 months old, so my on-site wastewater disposal system was probably a diaper. But eventually I began using the outhouse. Just to give you some flavor, a lot of people on Dunhams Bay have been there for many, many years, and a lot of families have been there for generations. Tom and I grew up spending summers on opposite sides of the bay, having a lot of fun, sometimes getting into a little bit of trouble, and it was great. In 1965, we still had our outhouse. We didn't have any indoor plumbing. We had a hand pump, and every morning we'd have to prime the pump so we could go out and get water to either make breakfast with or brush our teeth or do whatever. In 1965, when I left, the outhouse was still there. We moved about 7 cottages down the bay, and whoa, we had indoor plumbing. We actually had a pump. We got water. We had a toilet. We had several sinks. My father and I added the hot water and the shower. The camp we bought at that time was probably built in the 40s and was really only used mostly in the winter for hunting. It was never really used much in the summertime. And we've been there ever since. Along comes the North Queensbury Wastewater Disposal District. We start our program of compiling information. We had 2 main thrusts for our project: to compile information about the current systems on the lake through inspections. We wanted to have an inspection program and see how much information we could gain about what was there. And also we wanted to educate homeowners on what they could do to move their systems forward to something that was probably better functioning than what they had. Many of the homes on the bay are the homes that have been there since they were put up. There have been a few minor renovations on certain places and stuff, but mostly we're talking about camps that have been there for years. So most people have had a septic system that has been there since their camp went in. That's many, 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 many years, decades. As part of the process, we were trying to get our homeowners to pump out their septic systems, and as Barbara indicated, we were offering some reimbursement for the septic system pump outs. So far, we haven't had too many people pump out their systems. However, we have had about a third of the properties inspected by an engineer. But the most important thing I think that has been happening now is that we now have a lot of people looking at enhanced treatment systems for their properties. We even have had 12 property owners install enhanced treatment systems. That's fully 20% of the district, which really comprises about 60 parcels. I think in 2 years, that's a pretty exciting response to what's been going on. We haven't had many people do pump outs, as I said, but that's because they've just gone straight to replacement of systems. And most of these people that have been replacing systems haven't had to have an inspection or anything else. They know that their system is 70 or 80 years old. It sits probably 50 feet from the lake and probably consists mostly of, we found out, a metal tank, a short pipe of maybe 10 feet to a pile of rocks. That was the system. Now, we have great things happening with all the enhanced treatment systems. Many homeowners have reported an improvement in the water quality outside their camps. Now, algae can flow all around the lake, but you can begin to see in certain areas where there doesn't seem to be as much as there used to be. And one of our earlier presenters from the Minuski project indicated that based on their data this past summer, they've seen some improvement in the quality in the bay. And we're hoping to continue monitoring that even more. Right now, we've got a bit of a blip on our whole program because the New York State is restructuring the grants funding, the grant funding from the state of New York, Department of State, that takes care of the inspection process by the engineer. However, at our last meeting, which is in March, we meet about 9 months a year, mostly spring through fall. The board indicated that we should hone in on perhaps 20 of the systems that we think are old. We know they're old because all we have on the records is that they're at least put in before 1973. And also they're within 50 or 100 feet of the lake. So we're directing correspondence at those individual property owners and just asking them to update as far as what the town has for records. We're sending them a copy of what the town has for record of their system, many of which are just sketch plans, and say, can you update this and tell us if there's anything new? Or if there's not, just send it back to us and say there's nothing new. So we're trying to work in a targeted way to address perhaps another third of the systems that we think really need some work. We've been working with homeowners. We've sent out many letters, a lot of correspondence, trying to set up inspections and do everything else. It's been a hit or miss kind of situation. But we're hoping with this targeted approach we'll get somewhere. But I think there's two things that have made this program viable so far and made it really, I think, a great success. One is the advisory board, which has taken the time and effort, they're all volunteers, to talk to their neighbors. Several of the advisory board members have actually installed new systems themselves. The neighbors have seen them going in, and then the neighbors have said, who did that? Where did they come from? Give us a recommendation, and then they've gone out and done it themselves. So the advisory board is doing a lot of the educating just by acting. And secondly, we've been very fortunate that the Fund for Lake George every year has allocated $50,000 in funding to cover up to half of the system with a certain cap on it for the installation of the system. Most of the systems that people are putting in Dunhams Bay are running $10,000 to $20,000. That's pretty cost effective. And most of these systems that have gone in are systems where the people have owned the property for years, they care about the lake, they have been there, their parents have been there, maybe their grandparents have been there, and it's really just fabulous to see all of these people working on this. We're not talking about people who are renovating the entire camp and of course would need to put in a new system to be compliant with the building code, but we're talking about people who care about the lake and are moving forward. So, thank you all.